So, speaking of this trial, who were the two heavyweights that the court brought in?
Great question. This is fascinating too. I mean, every layer of this trial just blows your mind when you hear about what happened. So you got this little town, and they want a publicity stunt to bring business, right? ACLU is going to defend John Scopes, the teacher, to test the Butler Act. Turned out it really wasn't about the Butler Act, although legally that was the only question. It became about so much more. It became about evolution versus the Bible. And so when the trial, when the knowledge of the trial that it was going to happen became known, the fundamentalist side, the Anti-Evolution League, the fundamentalist side, an attorney in Dayton by the last name Sue, I believe, contacted Williams Jennings Bryan because he helped introduce this anti-evolution legislation in many of the southern states. I think like 15 to 20, just like in Tennessee. And so they asked him, a famous orator. He taught Bible study that would bring in 5,000 people in Miami. He was he was bigger than Trump and Obama put together today. I mean, this guy was huge, a big name, Williams Jennings Bryan. So the fundamentalist movement asked him to represent their cause, prosecuting John Scopes for breaking that law. And of course, he was looking for these kind of platforms because that's what he was doing. Williams Jennings Bryan was the 3-time presidential candidate. He was a Secretary of State under Calvin Coolidge. Is it Calvin Coolidge? I may have that wrong. A president back in that time. He did all kinds of legislation that was huge. He was kind of a progressive. Got women's right to vote, women's suffrage, and all kinds of other things that we won't go into today. But he was huge, and he was probably one of the greatest speakers in our country's history. And he believed in the Bible as written. He was a fundamental Christian. He liked to defend the Bible, and he agreed to do it, and he volunteered his services. And so you have William Jennings Bryan coming to Dayton, Tennessee. So this turned into from a little tiny trial to a worldwide event. It's like Muhammad Ali coming, right?
Yeah.
To town. And so once that happened, there's this other dude named Clarence Darrow. And he is the most famous criminal lawyer in the country. And he is an atheist. He's an agnostic. He doesn't like fundamental Christianity. He calls Christianity the slave religion. And when he sees Bryan's coming, he now wants to volunteer with ACLU and be part of their team because he really wants to once and for all put religion in its place and, kind of destroy the fundamentalist Christian movement. And also, he knows what Bryan stands for, and he wants to come in to put Bryan in his place and to stop this, especially laws supporting the teaching of the Bible, right? So anyway, Clarence Darrow, I won't go into all his history other than he was just huge. And he was brilliant, and he was smart in a courtroom. And you can see later in the trial, he came to this trial ready with every trick in the book to manipulate what was going to happen to pass his agenda, which was to make you and I, believers in the Bible, make us look like fools, to be taking the Bible seriously. That was his agenda. And the biggest fool who believes the Bible literally is William Jennings Bryan. And by the way, these were teams of attorneys. And you had a judge that was a Christian. They started the trial every day with a prayer. But anyway, you had Darrow and you had William Jennings Bryan, the two heavyweights coming together with their whole team. I was thinking about it today. It's almost like a Super Bowl. You got these teams with the great quarterbacks, and you got all these other players on the teams, and you got the referee, the judge, and this is a clash. And man, it kind of went back and forth. Every quarter was a little different. The plays were all different. Who has the best playbook, and who has the secret plays that could make things happen that you never thought about? It was like the Super Bowl in the spiritual world, in the Christian world, and it was a battle for sure. But that is the two. The two guys that showed up that really made this worldwide in importance. And I will say, Williams Jennings Bryan brought his concern forward to this trial because he was passionate about the idea that if you teach evolution in the public schools, because he's talked to parents, he's talked to other people out there. If you bring evolution to the public schools, you're taking God out of everything, and you're going to cause young people to lose their faith. And we've seen today, statistics today that prove that. Just exactly what they thought would happen has happened today. There's a movement from young people moving out of the churches because they think science has disproven the Bible. And they do believe in evolution in millions of years. And what they were worried about, what William Jennings Bryan was worried about, was that. And that's why he wanted to come and do everything he could to really, too, I should say, just see that evolution was taught as a theory, not as a fact. That was his big deal, and but he did understand the dangers of evolution, and he didn't believe at one point that science supported evolution. But there was this massive wave of supposed good science that supported evolution that he didn't believe. In fact, I love what he said. And William Jennings Bryan is my new hero. I mean, he is so big in this country. He even had a 2-cent stamp with his picture on it, by the way. So he was already big. And then they started a college after his name. So his name still lives on. But he is my hero. By the way, I'll go back to the courthouse. There's a statue of William Jennings Bryan in the courthouse lawn. And there's a statue later that the Freedom from Religion Act wanted put on the courthouse because they wanted to be represented there too. So they put up a statue of Clarence Darrow on the courthouse lawn. But you go there at night, there's a light on one statue. Which one do you think it is? William Jennings Bryan got a light on it because he was sharing the light of the word, and the town loved him for the most part. Clarence Darrow's in the dark. There's no light on him. Anyway, but William Jennings Bryan is my hero, and he because back then he thought about the dangers of teaching evolution, which today we know are true, and he was concerned that really there wasn't good science to support evolution, even though all these experts they brought to the trial we'll talk about were trying to show that it was. That's all been debunked today. So Clarence Darrow, William Jennings Bryan, face off. Think about one of those commercials for the Super Bowl. Bam, bam, it's Darrow against William Jennings Bryan in a little town of Dayton, Tennessee. And by the way, over 200 news stations covered this. Like I said, the whole world covered it. They built a little airplane runway to bring reporters in. The town swelled from 1,500 people to over 5,000. It turned into a carnival atmosphere. There were monkeys brought to town. There were evolution advocates and there were Bible advocates. There was, it was just an amazing atmosphere, and everybody came to see this battle between the spiritual battle, I'll say, and then of course the trial started, and it's just a fascinating story how the trial went.
So, when Darrow brought these 8 experts into the courtroom,
yeah,
why did he do this?
That's a great question. So that leads us right into the trial, right? Day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The trial went on for 8 days. It was a 12-day period, and it was hot in July there in Dayton. And you got all these people in this carnival going on. Well, like I said, Darrow was brilliant, and this was his platform to destroy fundamental Christianity and get it out of the world, right? Because if we're a Bible-believing society, then we're ignoring science and modern things that were happening in the country today. If you believe in the Bible, you can't believe in technology or medicine or this. That's how crazy some people thought about it. So Darrow, it wasn't about did John Scopes break that law. That's fascinating too. So basically, John Scopes taught out of the Hunter's Civic Biology book, and it had a chapter of evolution in it. So yeah, if he was a substitute teacher, I guess you could say that maybe he taught evolution because he was using that textbook. But John Scopes himself even said, I never taught evolution. I can't remember what I taught. But during the trial, they brought a few students in to testify. And guess what? Those students got coached by Clarence Darrow and John Scopes on what to say. That's perjury. So anyway, like I said, there's so many twists and turns to this thing. It's fascinating. So anyway, they coached these students to come in. And let's just say this, that it was pretty easy to convince the jury that John Scopes did teach evolution for those reasons. You had students, you had the book, you had a couple other school officials testify. So it looked like the case was over. John Scopes was going to be found guilty. Pretty simple, right? But the defense had a whole other idea Clarence Darrow in the defense of John Scopes, it wasn't about the Butler Act. It was about whether they, number one, could prove that evolution was true. Number two, there were people that would say evolution and the Bible don't conflict. Evolution fits in the Bible, which we know it doesn't, for various reasons we could go into. But Clarence Darrow wanted to once and for all prove evolution, and science supported evolution. So he invites these 8 big names from big colleges, big scientists, to come into this trial to give their so-called evidence of evolution. And these were big names, and there were 8 of them, and they're from all over the country. And so the judge argued with the defense, like, we're not here to prove evolution. But they would argue that, well, you need to know what evolution is, because first of all, what is it and did he teach it? And secondly, if evolution and the Bible go together, what harm is there? You know, if they're compatible, why not teach both the Bible and evolution in public schools? You know, arguments like that. But Darrow's real objective was to prove evolution and try to get religion and the Bible out of public schools altogether, get that whole thing cleaned up. But so they were on this rampage to prove evolution was true with these experts. The experts came in, only one got to testify, and the judge finally said, you know, we're not here to prove evolution, but here's another twist, and here's another thing to keep in mind. Darrow, when you look at the whole story, his idea was to lose this trial. He wanted to lose this trial from the beginning because he wanted to get it out of Dayton and take this bigger issue to the Supreme Court. So his whole plan was to lose the trial, which was fascinating to me. He had all this figured out. He's brilliant in the courtroom. So he was kind of upset because the judge wouldn't let the experts actually testify. And if they were to testify, Brian would cross-examine them, so you'd have this big fight. But because it wasn't about that, the judge did let them bring their testimony to court, but it was just read into the records. So if you want to read what those experts' testimony was and what the evidence was, you have to go to the text. Or you can read a publication I did, The Greatest Legal Battle in American History, or in the Acts and Facts article about the Scopes trial I wrote with the Institute for Creation Research. There's some good information on some of the actual evidence that they tried to bring forward to support evolution. But yeah, so Claro brought in these evolution experts. They got to read their testimony into the script or the text of the trial. Only one testified. And today, as a scientist today, we have all this information. You guys understand it really well. We have all this evidence and information that supports the Bible like ever before, does not support evolution in millions and billions of years, but they didn't know that back then, right? But all this stuff got entered, and what's fascinating to me is the same stuff that we teach in the public schools today and have been for the last 100 years is that nonsense that those evolution experts brought as testimony and support of evolution. We still teach it today, even though it's been debunked. And we may get into that, right? So there you go.
All right, so you mentioned that these evidences that these experts presented has been debunked in modern and recent years.
Right.
So one of the evidences that was brought up during the trial was that life originated as a single-celled organism that developed into all the different life forms, the same way that we start out as a single-celled organism in the womb and grow into the humans. What's the validity behind that?
Well, what fascinates me, Stone, when I go back and I read their evidence, their testimony, they were confused. They were it was like smoke and mirrors. They were pulling tricks, or maybe they really believed this stuff. I don't know where they were at in some ways. Maybe they convinced themselves that proved evolution, but you're right. So as we get into these 8 experts' evidence for evolution, it's all been debunked today. And when I say debunked, I mean we all look at the same evidence, right? And you have a pair of glasses on. You're interpreting what you see in the world depending on your worldview. I have a biblical worldview as a scientist now. They didn't. They were secular. So they interpret the evidence one way. I interpret it from a biblical perspective. The evidence today, as a scientist and part of thousands of other scientists, we think the evidence points to the authority of God's Word. The evidence points to the Bible being true. Now, these guys, their evidence was millions and billions of years, and the evidence to prove evolution. Now, first, it's really important to define evolution. We always got to define our terms, right? When you're talking to people, make sure you know what they're talking about. There's microevolution, which is variations in kinds. That's like how many different variations of horses, dogs, cats. We all agree in genetics and breeding or whatever, you can take variations God put into kinds described in the Bible and make variations of a species. But dog is still a dog, as we like to say, right? Cat's still a cat, horse still a horse. We're not seeing a bacteria or an amoeba, one cell, by adding DNA and information into the DNA structure of that one cell, change into, let's say, a sponge or, I don't know, a coral or something on the evolutionary tree. You know, you're not seeing information added to that bacteria or amoeba that is evolving into different kinds of organisms or whatever to you and me. So we don't go from an amoeba to an amphibian, reptile, fish, mammal, ape, man. We don't see that happening, and there's no method for that. And by the way, those evolutionists agreed to that. They said, it happens, but we don't know how. We don't know what the method is, but somehow it happens. But to your point, they brought in this idea, because now we defined evolution, right? Darwin and everybody defines evolution as simple life. We're all here because we evolved or we have a common ancestor. We all evolved from a bacteria or an amoeba, right? Adding information, non-directed, non-purposeful changes in all of our DNA. In DNA and life was changed and information added to make you and me. So evolution, and Darwin said, he even said, if you can show that anything that doesn't advance in complexity through small, successional, minute changes over time, if you can show any examples of that, then you've proven my theory false. Well, we have. But anyway, that's what evolution is. From the simple to the complex, we all have a common ancestor. And so, yeah, they talk about the theory that we all started from a single cell. But are you kidding me? So they tried to take an embryo or a cell that is fertilized, the egg and sperm fertilized inside your mother's womb, and say, oh yeah, see there's one cell that divides into a zygote and an embryo and all that. See, you and I developed from one cell to you and me, and look how handsome we are, right? But because it happens in our mother's womb, that proves evolution. It happens out in the environment, in the real world, over millions and billions of years. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. And even today, I laugh at that logic. And they were totally confused about that. They're confused about what evolution is, the method, and all this. But you know, in their defense, that's what they thought they knew back then. They didn't have what we know today. Science has given us so much more information. Just look at the cell today. Look at the DNA today. Look at what we have today. That absolutely screams to an intelligent designer. No accident, no chance. We're not here by mutations over billions of years. There is too much complexity and fine-tuning and everything to have you and me here. And we know it's a creator God, right? We know it's Jesus, our creator. But yeah, that was a long answer to your question about evolution, single cells, and how they confused embryology to support their idea that we all came from a single cell. So on one hand, they believe we evolved from a single cell and that's how all life got here. But they tried to show, because you and I grew from a single cell, I guess our mother's egg, and then the sperm hit the egg. It starts as a single cell, but quickly divides, that's proof for evolution. That blows my mind, first of all, that they use that argument. But we know that God miraculously brings two sets of chromosomes together, the male and the female, and we end up with 46 chromosomes. They get together, and then the design and the beauty of that is look at how each one of those cells divide, and as we grow as a fetus, that DNA makes my hand, that DNA makes my ears, my eyes, my hair. God put into every one of those cells in the embryo and the fetus, all the way up to adults, you and me. God put that information in those cells, and I'm blown away just how in the world does a cell all of a sudden know to grow a toe,
Yeah.
or a heart. God is so big. You can just look at that and you know that there's a creator, right?
Yeah.